Hi, I'm Reverend Tom R., pastor at Village Church, and welcome to Village Connect. We are continuing our conversation about Paul's letter of joy, scholars call it. It's the letter he writes to the congregation at Philippi. So for this session, read Philippians 3, verses 1 through 16. Finish that and come back, and we'll get started with the conversation. So let's start, not at the beginning of the reading, but at the end of the reading, where Paul says he presses on toward the goal. I don't know if Paul was an athlete, but he uses a lot of athletic metaphors in his letters. He speaks of running races, of them fighting battles, and here he says he presses on. He strives toward the goal to make it his own because Christ has made him his own. There's no quit in Paul, and that's consistent throughout this letter and all of his letters. There's no quit in him. Now, admittedly, some things we need to quit. I talked to a friend of mine, Bill. He said he quit golf. He quit golf, and he actually gave his clubs to his brother-in-law, all except for his pitching wedge, which evidently he threw somewhere in a pond just off of a number 4 green somewhere, he said. It's time for him to quit that. But Paul's not talking about choices that we make or don't make, a kind of activities we can participate in or not. He's talking about his faith, and he's talking about the fact that faith calls him to live toward a life that God intends for all of us. And when it comes to that, there's no quit in him. He presses on. He will not stop. That's where he concludes, but where he begins is with a warning. He says, beware of the dogs. It's quite a tone change in the letter when we get to that verse. Beware of the dogs. There's some kind of opponents to the church, and there's been a lot of debate about who exactly these opponents are and what is it about them that make them a threat to the church or to the gospel. And I think the specifics of that are not so important, but this is important. Whoever they are, they were people of faith, and they were proud of their faith, and they also believed that their practice of faith was satisfactory. They were pleased with it. And Paul responds to them and says, look, if they think they have reason to boast, I have more reason to boast than any of them. And then he gives his resume, which is a stellar Jewish resume, even saying to the law, in regards to the law, he is blameless. But then he says, compared to Christ, I count all of that as garbage. So we need to hear this carefully. He does not say that resume is garbage. He does not say that practice of faith is garbage. He said compared to Christ, it is garbage. That's a very different statement. It reminds me, I remember when I got rid of my first lazy boy kind of recliner. I brought it into the marriage. I loved that chair. But my wife hated that chair. She wanted something different. So we got rid of it. Now listen, I love the chair, but it was nothing compared to my marriage, to my relationship with my wife. There was no comparison. The chair was gone. In some way, Paul says, look, I had a journey. I had a spiritual life. I had a practice of faith that mattered to me, but it's nothing compared to the grace of Jesus Christ that I know in my own life now. Now, we need to be careful as we think through this because it's real for all of us. If your faith matters to you in your life, it has to be practiced. It has to show up in our lives. We pray, we attend worship, we practice generosity. You're in this study right now. It's a part of your practice of faith. But there are a couple of things about that that we need to be sure we understand. The practice of the faith is not the faith itself. The purpose of this is not for us just to practice. The purpose of our study, of our worship, of our generosity, of our service is that we might know the life that God intends for us and for all. And so our practices are something that are not to keep us satisfied with the way everything is. But no, our practices give us hope that we, like Paul, might press on. There's a temptation sometimes to think too small of our faith, to let our faith seem trivial. We go to worship just for the sake of worship, or sometimes we say just to help us get through another week. We give a little bit because we want to participate and it makes us feel good. We study because it's interesting and we like to learn. We like activity of the mind. But I think what Paul would remind us is all of this practice is because Jesus Christ is alive and He is calling for the world to be made new and for us to be made new. And toward that, we're always pressing on. We haven't reached it. I haven't reached it. You haven't reached it. We're not going to reach it in this life. But we press on toward God's promised day. That is our calling, and that is life-giving, and that is worth it. And so I am grateful that Paul has no quit in him. And I pray that you and I can now and then be a little more like him and press on toward the goal because Christ has made us His own.